Okay, welcome to this week's Zoom interview, Life Stories Live with David Walker. David, great to have you with us.
Yeah, it's great to be on, Paul, and thank you very much for the invitation to come along and share some of my life story with you guys.
Brilliant. What we're going to do today, if you're tuning in for the first time, is we're looking on a Friday to do a different kind of life story where we look at people's life and a certain aspect of it. So we've had Pete Wooding talking about being a journalist. We've had Eric Woodward talking about men that have inspired him. And this week, we're going to look at the world of work because Davey has a really interesting job and it's one that's really evolved in the last, well, I would say 20, 30 years, Davey. So one of the things we're going to do today is just have a look at that because we thought that'd be really interesting. If you have any comments, if you have a question, please feel free to put that in the comments box. I'll try my best to keep an eye on that. We'll also give you some updates on where we're at with Life Stories and some exciting news of things that are coming in the future. But Davey, just to help our audience get a picture and a feel for you, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So yeah, my name's David Walker. I live in the central belt of Scotland, along with my wife and 3 children. I say children, but they're 2 are in their 30s and one's in their 20s, so they're not small children anymore. I've worked with the same company now for the last 40 years. But originally, I come from a town not far from here called Coatbridge. I came from a very working class family. My father was a landscape gardener. My mother was an insurance agent, one of these people that went round the doors collecting the pennies and putting them away for people on a weekly basis. And at a very young age, my grandfather came to live with my family. I have an older sister. Just to help look after us. So my mother and father were very hardworking. My father tended to work 7 days a week. He'd work all day on a Sunday and half day on a Saturday and all day Monday to Friday. So he worked hard, and my mother worked 6 days a week. She always worked on a Saturday morning. And I can remember as a small boy going with her around the doors while she'd be collecting insurance money and getting a cup of tea and a cake and talking to the families as she did that type of thing. So even from a very young age, work was important to the family that I lived in. They worked very hard. They did their best to provide for me and my sister. And I recognised, even as a small child, that very strong work ethic. And being committed to work, and that's something that has kind of stuck with me through my working life. Went to school in Coatbridge, left school with very average qualifications. As I say, Coatbridge is a bit of a rough town. I came from a council estate. I did all the things that young boys did, get up to all sorts of mischief. School was in the back of my mind most of the time. But coming back to that work ethic thing, even getting into my early teens, I can remember starting to have lots of jobs. I did milk runs in the morning. I delivered papers in the evening. I did people's gardens for them during the summer. I used to collect scrap metal over the summer months and take it to the scrap yard to help clear people's gardens. I had a cuddly toy business. I don't know if people remember that the TV program, I think it was called 321, and there was a thing called Dusty Bin. I used to make dusty bins. My father used to bring the big cans from the canteen at the factory where he worked. And I used to get fur from the Airdrie market and put fur around them and eyes and noses and used to sell these dusty bins at a markup. And through my mother and being an insurance agent, I met older women who used to make so cuddly toys like teddy bears and rabbits, all sorts of things. And I used to sell them on for them. So I had a cuddly toy business. As I became an older teenager, my older sister left school and she worked for a company called Airdrie Salvage. And they used to recover things from factories and shops that had fire damage, etc., and then they used to sell them on cheap. And I used to go down and get things like training shoes and football boots and footballs and sports equipment and even food, chocolate bars. And I used to take them and sell them at lunchtime in the high school where I was. So even as a young boy, this work ethic had kind of crept into my life, and as I said, has stuck with me most of my career, Paul.
You know what? I wasn't envisaging you talking with an entrepreneurial spirit. that is something I never knew about you, Davey. But just because I know that we have a lot of young people who watch this, and I do worry about young people and the opportunities that come their way these days, because I think there's sometimes it's in some ways a lot easier if you're outgoing, if you're creative. Social media has given people a real advantage. But if you're not that style of person, I think breaking into the world of work and doing the things that you're doing can seem quite frightening. And I'm just wondering if you could just give us 30 seconds to inspire people who might not have that get up and go in them.
Yeah, no, I agree. The workplace, especially when you're young, as a teenager, trying to break into that kind of adult environment can be difficult. I think what you have to do is recognise the skills you've got and look for the opportunities. And when the opportunities come, just take them. Don't be afraid to do that. That's what I did as a young boy. As I say, I left school with very average qualifications, but I took every opportunity that came my way. I wasn't afraid to try and push myself to do something and learn new skills. Even before I got my apprenticeship, I was tarring roads for a few weeks. I was building fences. I would do anything just to find my place in the world. But what I would say is, when I was at school, I was always getting into trouble, and this is an interesting story. And I had one teacher who taught engineering science, and he was also saying, "Walker, you're in trouble again. I want you to write out Ohm's law for me 10 times or 20 times." And this seemed to happen just about every week. When I was at school, I was writing out Ohm's law. And it's funny, when I look back now, I've been working for 40 years for the same company. But I look back now, and when I went for the interview for the company that I worked with back 40 years ago, I went in front of one of their technical experts who was in charge of the plant workshop at the time. She said, "I'm going to ask you 3 technical questions. One was how to wire a plug, one was how power stations work, but one of them was, can you tell me Ohm's law?"
Wow.
And I said, "Ohm's law states that a conductor is maintained at constant physical conditions. The current flowing through the conductor is directly proportional to the potential difference across the ends of the conductor." And he was amazed. He says, "Oh, I wasn't looking for that full description of Ohm's law. I was just looking for V equals IR." And I got the job. And the only reason I knew Ohm's law, the full definition of Ohm's law, is because I was always getting into trouble at school. But I look back, and as a Christian, I can see God's hand in my life, even at that young age as a teenager. I wasn't learning it, but I was forced to learn it because of the troubles. But for the job that God wanted me to have, and I've had for the last 40 years, that was exactly what I needed to know. And I left school with average qualifications, but the one thing I needed to know, God made sure I learned it. And so if I've one bit of inspiration, just grab your opportunities, trust in what you know, and let God lead you.
2 quick things before we go into your job. Again, a slight tangent. One is that we are in National Apprenticeship Week, and I guess National Apprenticeship Week is something that might be really close to your heart, being a former apprentice and the importance of that. So I'd love you to touch on that before we go into the next bit. But also, I guess there's a huge sense of your story being about not being afraid of failure and being able to accept that we will fail at times, but we shouldn't be frightened of trying things.
Exactly, Paul. And we learn from our mistakes, and that's the important thing. So I've had a long career, and now in the job that I have, one element of it is mentoring graduates and apprentices coming through the business and encouraging them at the start of their career, and the things to do and the things to learn and how to conduct yourself in a professional manner. But yeah, one of the things I'll say to them is don't worry about getting it wrong. You know, we'll learn from mistakes, but don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to seek further information. Don't be afraid to seek guidance from those that can give you that. So there's an aspect of developing communication skills as a young person. But yeah, I started as an apprentice. I can always remember my very first day. I had to get into what was an old power station. It's closed a year after I went there, but it was a really old kind of derelict building. And I can remember going to the big wooden doors. I was there very early in the morning. I was like the second person in the building because I wanted to start early on time. And I can remember just opening the door into what was this big, vast, it was like an old power station shed, but it was now a plant workshop. And it was all kind of dimly lit and dark and dingy as kind of factory environments were 40 years ago. And I thought, oh my, you know, this is intimidating. This is a bit worrying. And I can remember out of the darkness came this very large, we called him fitters mates, but he was like assisted the fitters in the work that they did, but he was a big, massive guy. And he was like, who's that at the door? You know, and I can remember being absolutely terrified on that first day. But, you know, I overcame that initial fear of starting in the workplace. You start to make friends, you start to learn skills, and you just develop, and you develop as an individual, and the skills that you need, and either to do the job or to communicate, to build relationships, and to make a career for yourself. And I started as an apprentice. I'm now head of delivery. I have to deliver, you know, £35 million worth of spend this year in infrastructure projects in the central belt of Scotland. And it's been a journey, and it's been a path that I've been on. But, you know, we all have to start somewhere. And I started as an apprentice, and anybody listening today starting as an apprentice, grab the opportunity because you don't know what's ahead of you.
Fantastic. We just had a question come in, and I think it's rather apt to what you've just said. So I'm going to ask you this before I go into my questions. It says, love to know what people in the workplace influenced Davey the most. What people in the workplace influenced you the most?
Yeah, I've had a number of people that have influenced me over my career. I can remember as an apprentice, I worked with an established fitter called George, and he was very disciplined in his timekeeping, very disciplined in the work that he did, very disciplined in the quality of the work that he would leave behind. I was fortunate to work with this experienced fitter as a young man and develop those initial skills that helped to propel me. So he was certainly starting out in my early career. He was one of the individuals that helped me a lot. In latter years, I've worked very much with a very experienced, knowledgeable industry expert called Tom. As I moved up in my career, the level of knowledge and understanding of the network and technology had to increase. And I found in Tom someone who would spend time teaching, explaining, helping to develop me as an individual. And that's another piece of advice that I would pass on today on the call. You know, it's not everyone that's got that skill, that have got the patience and the time to sit with people and explain things and help to develop them. So you have to be aware of the people you're working with and who are the best people to talk to. And once you get that person, you have to stick with them, you know. And someone told me when I was young, if you want to be an expert, you have to hang about with experts. And that's what it's all about. You know, through my career, I've hung about with the best fitters, the best engineers, the best technical experts. For the last 20 years, I've worked on a lot of international institutions, developing IEC standards, developing technical brochures through CE. So the people that are in that community are the world industry experts in their field, whether it be in power engineering or whether it be in dielectric liquids or some of the other areas where I now regard myself as having a very good level of knowledge. But the only reason I got there is because I hung about with the experts. So if you want to become an expert in something, hang about with the experts. It's the only way to do it.
Just let's go back a little bit on, after just going off on that tangent, to how 40 years ago a day in your working life would look as an apprentice.
Yeah, so when I started in that old kind of dingy power station, which has now been transformed into a plant workshop, I'd be there, before 8 o'clock in the morning. You would start with a cup of tea and gather in a room with maybe about 20 other fitters and some other apprentices that maybe a year or two older than me. It was very much a man's world at that point. The conversation was all very manly, let's say. There would be a lot of laughing and joking and ribbing people to get a bit of fun. But then all of a sudden the foreman would come in. Typically the foreman was someone with lots of experience, but hard as nails, let's say. And he would say, right, that's 8 o'clock, get out on the floor and start work. And very much so you would be working, modifying equipment or building plant that would then go out and be put on the electricity network. At lunchtime, there was always a bit of fun. We would play football for 30 minutes and have a laugh and a joke. But, I enjoyed it. All through my career, I've enjoyed every stage of it. There was no mobile phones in those days. There was no computers. You got your work verbally, or you got it on a worksheet written down for you. So certainly things that have changed a lot. In those days, even a few years later when I became an engineer, I used to have a carbon copy pad that I would write down what work I would want done in the following week, and that would then go in an envelope and get posted down to the work control, and they would book resources or materials for me. We didn't have mobile phones. It was pen and paper, or it was the landline phone in the office. So things were a lot slower. Now things have changed completely, so you're constantly on the line. People can get you instantly. Information is changing very quickly. Your day-to-day workload can change in a moment with a couple of emails or a phone call or a Teams meeting, whatever. What I would say is probably more demanding than it was when I started, because you have time to think about things, time to plan things properly, looking 2 or 3 weeks ahead. Now everything is instant. I want a meeting now. We need to change this, we need to change it now. And so I would say the stress on people starting in the workplace has increased significantly. There's no way to hide. Whereas in the past, if I get sent out to site to work, I'd be out away for 8 hours. I wouldn't hear from anyone until I come back in to the yard after 8 hours, and then I'd get an update on what happened that day. Now, no matter where you go, you're on the hook. Someone will get you either on the phone or through some sort of mobile device. So yeah, the workplace has changed significantly. Maybe not for the better in some ways, but certainly it's changed significantly.
I was going to just say, it doesn't sound off the tone of the way you're describing and talking about it, that things have improved through this added layer of technology.
No, I think, I can remember as a boy watching television programs and they were saying when this technology comes, life's going to be a lot easier for us. We'll have a lot more leisure time. We'll only need to work 3 days a week because all this technology will take away the workload. And I actually find now that my workload and my day is longer than it ever was, and that just increases every year because the technology means things change very, very quickly. That pace changes very quickly. You need to keep up with it. So therefore, people are always drawn back to what's the latest email, what's the latest message I've got on my phone. People don't take the time just to close the laptop or switch the phone off and go and get some downtime, a proper lunch break, or finish at a proper time. They spend time with their family or spend time talking with other people. So I would say the workplace is far more demanding than it was when I started, and certainly not the way I envisaged it would be as a small child watching the TV programs and being told that I'd only have to work 3 days a week because the technology would do everything for me,
Yeah, and we've just had a really interesting question as well that feeds in, I think, to some of that. is how do you respond to that pressure as a Christian? How does that affect you in the workplace, and how do you, you know, deal with those sort of demands and everybody literally, you know, watching for any mistake?
Yeah. So yeah, I think as you say, it can be difficult for Christians in the workplace because you know, you're kind of Christ's representative there in the way that you conduct yourself and how you do your work, to your level of commitment, and therefore you want to do your best, because the Bible teaches us that as Christians, that we were kind of made to work to some extent, and God has put us in that environment to be His representative. So you want to do your best, but also in setting an example in how you work and conduct your work, I think as Christians, it's also good to set an example in how you live your life outside of work, you know. So therefore, certainly when there's a disaster and you have to respond, that's one thing. But day to day, you have regular start times and finishing times, and also take time out to talk to people, not just about work, but other things. And as I said, I kind of mentor graduates and apprentices now, and that's one of the things I like. I'll take a half hour or I'll take a half day out of my work, and I'll just go and spend time with them, switch off my phone, get away from the pressure of my day-to-day job, and invest time in developing other people and speaking to them. And it's the same at finishing time. You know, I try not to, when it comes 5 o'clock, stay on the laptop to 6, 7, 8, and constantly going back to look at emails. When it comes to my finishing time, I switch my laptop off and I spend the night with my family. And I think as Christians, that's what we have to do, because we have a commitment to them as well as to the people we work for and the people we work with. And you have to find that balance. But it's not easy. My job has changed recently in the last year, but before that, before COVID, I used to travel a lot. You know, nearly every week I could be away from home 2 or 3 nights, somewhere in Europe or even further afield, Korea, Australia, India, on work business. And that takes a lot of time out of your life that you can't spend doing the things that we like doing as Christians, Paul, but a lot of time out of your life that you would normally spend with your family. So therefore, it was really important for me that when I did get home at the weekend, I made that time available for my wife and children to try and keep that balance. But it's difficult. It's difficult. And I think that as Christians, we need to kind of self-check on a regular basis, and we need to touch base with other Christians that know us and we have good relationship with us and can say, Davey, you're working too much, you're spending too much time away from home, you're needing to slow down. Whatever that advice may be, it's good to surround yourself with people who can give you that bit of advice as well.
I just wondering, on the pandemic side, how's COVID affected your world of work?
Yeah, well, as I say, before COVID, I would travel nearly every week somewhere in the world. And then COVID came along and I found myself working from home virtually for the last, for about 18 months until I moved job recently. So as I say, I'm in my 40th year with the company. So it's no surprise to say I'm kind of coming to the end of my career. But that period of life, God spoke to me and said that time of travel is now over, and I want you to be spending more time at home and changing my focus to some extent. And so I've taken on a new position last summer, which is very much based in the central belt of Scotland where I live, delivering infrastructure projects, which is all part of the green recovery. So we got additional money from the government to put in infrastructure for EV chargers and heat pumps and all this green technology that is low carbon. And to be honest with you, I thought that was a nice way for me to end my career, is doing something that I enjoy doing, but also gives something back to the wider community through these low carbon technologies. I've worked in the power industry for 40 years, but it's nice at the tail end of it to be kind of reducing the impact that we have in the environment through the work that I'm doing now.
I suppose, the COP20, was it the COP26 that's just taken place in Glasgow? That would have been something that will influence your industry quite heavily.
Very much so, yeah. And the company I work for, was one of the major sponsors of that event, and is very much into renewable energy and green technologies. And I was involved in COP26 and attended the event as well because of that. So yeah, very much enjoy now being in a company that has got that focus, on the environment. Since the Industrial Revolution, as humans, we've had a big impact on the world and the environment, and obviously, as caretakers of it, we have to make sure that we limit that damage. And so it's nice, not something that I'd always thought of in my career, but now getting to the end of my career and maybe getting a bit older, it's something that I'm very conscious of. And yeah, COP26 was quite a successful event, but for me as an individual, and the projects that I'm doing now, which are associated with COP26, one of the projects I did was associated with that, is very much quite fulfilling to myself to be involved in it.
Tell us about that project. What is it and what's it doing?
Yeah, so as part of COP26, we put in a lot of infrastructure to allow charging points for electric vehicles. Associated with, let's call the blue light, like the police and fire brigade, etc. So as you know, there was a lot of police involved in the security for COP26. So putting in a lot of infrastructure for police electric vehicles. We're also putting in major infrastructure to allow green technologies, potentially with regards to generation that's more renewable and a lot greener. Which will have an impact in Glasgow, but also for connection of homes that are moving away from gas and more towards all electric, and the source of that electric energy will be from renewable sources. So it's a lot of infrastructure, new connection points that will allow all these green technologies, houses with heat pump, as I said, rather than gas. To allow all these technologies to connect to our network, which will have an impact on the carbon that we produce and help to lower it.
And I guess we see a lot from Christians about their thoughts on the environment and the issues that are coming up. And Christians really do seem to sit in different camps on this. What's your thought as a Christian on environment and obviously the workplace?
Yeah, well, I don't think we can hide from the science, Paul. The temperature in the world is getting higher. That we are reducing the rainforests. The weather is changing. The climate's changing. I see that as as a young boy, I used to troop through snow, which seemed to be up to my head every winter, and now we hardly get any snow. So I don't think we can hide from that and say we're not having an impact. And as I said, as Christians, as stewards of this planet to some extent, we need to make sure that we are not having a negative impact on the environment, on the animals that share the planet with us, and other humans that we live with, no matter where they are in the world. We might be okay in the UK, but there's people in other parts of the world that are really, really struggling because of the rise in the sea level, etc. And I think, as Christians, we can't hide from that. Obviously we have got hope in Christ that he's going to come back someday, and maybe someday soon, and we'll go to heaven and live with him. But that doesn't mean we can neglect the planet that we live on. I've got children, and hopefully one day have grandchildren, and I want to make sure that the planet's still there for them also.
I just want to touch just finally on that aspect, because I find it really interesting to see how much great work is going on across Scotland, Scottish businesses. It's a real discussion place for entrepreneurs and large and small companies about their carbon footprint and how they make a difference. And I'm just wondering if that's, off your experience of traveling around the world, something that's different in Scotland than other countries.
Yeah, I think, as you say, there's a good mix. I think, in some countries in the world, just because of where they are and their development, the last thing in their mind is, moving to renewable energy and greener technologies. They're really just playing catch up with the rest of us. And then there's other countries where the attitude of the people is, well, it doesn't matter, it's all a red herring. We've been through cycles like this before, and I don't think it's really happening. So there's those kind of attitudes. But what I would say is, certainly here in Scotland, certainly the company that I work with, we have taken all of the evidence into consideration, and we are moving to that low carbon technology. Scotland is one of the best places in the world for renewable energy, certainly wind and probably wave as well. So we're developing lots of onshore and offshore renewable energy. We've got links that are going down both the west coast and now down the east coast to transmit all that energy down to where the load base is in the south of England. And I think that we are very much at the forefront of adopting this move towards lower carbon and renewable energy and more sustainable lifestyle and use of energy. And to be honest with you, where we are as a developed country, we need to be setting that example so that the others that are catching up will try and move closer towards what we are doing, rather than just continue with coal and oil and this rush to catch up with us. We need to set an example where they'll start to adopt more greener technologies to reduce the impact that they'll have on the planet.
Fantastic, really interesting information that you're giving us, Davey, and we've got a couple more questions before we finish, but I just want to say, if you're watching anywhere in the world now, don't forget, Monday night we have a live story every Monday night. This week it's Ben and Rachel Petras. Please join them 8 p.m. UK time. Davey, just as we come to the end of looking at your life in a work perspective, I just wonder if you could just maybe give us a couple of tips for anybody who's maybe either getting to the point where they're looking for a job, or even they've just gone into a job and maybe they're not sure if it's the right one.
Yeah, so obviously, as a Christian, I look back at my life and I see God's hand moving me. There might be people in the call that are Christians or aren't, but I think that it's always good to be mindful of God's leading and direction in your life, to be in the job and the place that He wants you to be. But certainly, I do a lot of interviews and recruiting now in the job that I'm in. And what I would say, as a tip to people, make sure that when you're preparing to, for an interview or to go into a place of work, that you research, the company that you're going to work for, the job that you're going to be doing, you have some insight. And when you're asked a question, you always answer the question and rather than divert off at tangents. But it's good to also show yourself, be true and honest in the interview and how you present yourself in a way that people can make that connection and relate to you. In life, I've realised that it's all about relationships, so it's relationship as a Christian with my Heavenly Father, but in life it's all about relationships with individuals, and part of being successful is being able to build good relationships, and that starts on day one when you start a new job. Be nice to people, build relationships with people. Don't be afraid to ask questions and learn from people. Work at developing those relationships, invest time, and that'll hold you in good stead. There's people that I've developed relationships with over the years, and I count them as good friends. They're maybe workplace relationships, but they're good friends. Because I've invested time with them, I've learned from them, I've been willing to share my knowledge with them, and I think that's something that if you want to develop and grow in whatever role you choose as a profession, it's all about building good relationships and being nice to people, I would say, at the end of the day.
And you've touched on your Christian faith a number of times. I guess prayer is something that you would really advise people? We know that the new evidence is that prayer helps people mentally. It helps people with self-confidence issues. It also is a great way of replenishing the brain. It's now coming out. Prayer affects your brain in a powerful way. I'm just wondering if you have any little anecdotal stories of how prayer has been something you've used in the workplace.
Yeah, very much. I could share one story, and this goes back to when I was a apprentice, and I was working with a fitter's mate, a guy called Tommy, and we used to have to travel quite far down to a place called Gairlochhead to work on a daily basis. But in conversation with Tommy, I knew that he had lots of problems and struggles in his life. He had a drug addiction. His father had died when he was very young. He'd been raised by his mother and his two sisters. He'd get into martial arts, so he was always getting into fights and into trouble. So I knew he had a bit of a troubled life, but I made a good relationship with him, and I started praying for him and asking God to help me intervene and encourage Tommy to try and get him out of this addiction and get his life straight. And I can remember that in prayer, God spoke to me and asked me to invite him along to a men's camp, which they held in Aberfoyle in Scotland. And so I asked Tommy if he would like to go. And after a wee bit of persuading, he said, yeah, I'll go to this camp. And so I was praying continually for Tommy that he would come along. And it got to the week of the camp, and I couldn't get a hold of him. He was off sick at work. He'd been off sick for 2 or 3 weeks. Couldn't get a hold of him. Eventually, I phoned his mother, and she said, no, he's actually in hospital. You can't contact him. And I don't think he'll be getting out of hospital in the foreseeable future. And I was devastated because I'd been praying and I felt God really wanted to do something in this man's life at the camp. And I was thinking, how has this happened, God? Have I got it so wrong in the prayers that I've been making? So anyway, the camp started on the Friday, and on the Wednesday night, Tommy phoned me, and he was actually in a hospital for people with mental illness, just in the outskirts of Glasgow. And he said, I was going to commit suicide a few weeks ago, and I've been taken into hospital. I've all sorts of trouble with depression, etc. But I spoke to the doctors, and I told them that I was going to a Christian men's camp this Friday. And they've agreed, if you come to the hospital and pick me up and kind of sign for me in some way, they'll let me out for the weekend to go to the Christian men's camp.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, praise God. So I picked him up on the Friday. And on the Friday night, some people shared testimony, a bit like I was doing just now. And one of the men said, I believe there's somebody here who's really struggled with mental illness over the last few weeks, and even at one point was committing suicide. But I believe he's now here tonight for a reason. Is that man here? And Tommy got up, walked to the front, and gave his heart to the Lord. Wow. And his life had completely transformed. He became a Christian, got rid of his drug addiction, and started sharing and even travelling to Ireland and places in the UK to share his testimony of how God had worked in his life. So that's one example of prayer, So talking to God, seeking his face, trusting in what he's telling you. And he answers prayer, and he answered prayer for me, but also for Tommy, and completely changed Tommy's life.
Wow, that's an amazing little story, Davey, of the power of prayer. If you want to ask Davey a question afterwards, or if you want to leave a comment, we will feed that back to Davey. So if you're watching this after it's been live, please leave a comment, leave a question. We'll connect you up with Davey, and I'm sure he would love to have a chat with you. You can also ring us. Don't forget, you can call us on 07943 550287, 07943 550287. You can WhatsApp that number outside of the UK, and you'll see in the comments box a link. You can also click it and go to the website. So there's lots of ways to interact with us, lots of ways to carry on the conversation. If there's anything you've heard today you'd like to know more of. We've got one question left for Davey today. It's a question we ask everybody who comes on LifeStories. It's your final question of your life story. And what we want to know, Davey, is what's been the best decision you've made in your life?
Well, that's an easy one, Paul. Obviously, as a Christian, I look back to when I was a teenager. I can remember as I say, get invited along to what was a kind of coffee bar evening in a Baptist church in Coatbridge, with some other young people that were there. And there was a young man there. When I say young man, he was maybe in his 30s at the time, but he'd been in the Merchant Navy, travelled the world, became an alcoholic, ended up with nothing somewhere in a foreign land, and had cried out to God to rescue him and save him. And God did. He answered his prayers, and that man was there that night sharing his testimony or his story, a bit like what I'm doing just now. And for some reason, I'd been in church before because I was taken with my grandfather, but it all just went over my head. But for some reason that night, I found myself listening to every word that man was saying. I was really drawn and attracted to the story and how God had worked in a man's life and totally transformed it, and given him his life back, basically. And I found myself really drawn to it. And in my spirit, I was really in turmoil because I knew I wasn't a Christian. And the man must have known, because he came and sat down next to me and asked if I would like to become a Christian. And I said I would. And we went through into the main part of that church. It was an old church with wooden pews and a nice kind of altar bit at the front. And we got down and prayed. And I got on my knees and just asked the Lord Jesus Christ to come into my heart and life and be my saviour and my friend, and to guide me and to keep me safe and through my life. And you know what? He has been faithful. Ever since. You know, he's blessed me in lots of ways. We haven't the time to share it, but you know, he's comforted me when I needed comfort. He's given me a job and provided for me and my family. He's healed me when I was sick. He's just looked after me in so many ways in my life. It doesn't mean I haven't had troubles, but he's been there through those troubles, and I always feel his presence. And that's why it's easy. The best decision I ever made was giving my heart and life to the Lord Jesus Christ and becoming a Christian.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Davey. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. It's gone so quick and it's just been so interesting. But if you want to interact further with Davey, leave a comment, leave a question, or give us a call. Or click the link, and we would love to hear from you. And remember, Monday night, we've got another live story with Ben and Rachel Petras. I'm sure you would be really, really blessed if you can join us at 8 p.m. UK time. Davey, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. And thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about your world of work.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Paul. I've really enjoyed being on, and I hope people have enjoyed listening to